My name is Carl Jhensen. I'm 42 years old, and I've always lived under the California sun. My life seemed ordinary, peaceful to a point, until an unexpected event turned my world upside down. My neighbor, a reserved man whom many people didn't even notice, decided to leave me his house in his will. But the gift, which should have been an act of kindness, turned into a curse. My own siblings, the ones I grew up with under the same roof, turned against me, trying to sue me to take what wasn't theirs. What seemed like a simple legal detail became a family war, filled with envy, secrets, and threats. Today, I'm going to tell you how it all happened, and why that house not only changed my fate, but also revealed the true colors of every person who claimed to love me. The light hits the facade of the stucco houses like a spotlight, and I've always felt like an extra on my own street. I'm Carl Jhensen, 42 years old, born and raised in California. And before the inheritance, before my neighbor's will, before the lawsuit my siblings would use as a threat, my life was filled with routines as predictable as the smell of fresh coffee in my Silver Lake apartment. I work as a lease contract reviewer for a small real estate agency in Echo Park, papers that pass through my hands like grains of sand at the beach. 1,000 grains, no memories. The world seemed calm on the outside, but inside, something was creaking. The first sound of the day was the automatic lawn sprinklers, a whisper that traveled up the street lined with jacaranda trees. The second was the creak of my neighbor Arthur Linden's gate. He was 8 and 3 when he smiled, but he looked 1,000 years old when he listened. Arthur lived in a one-story house with a porch, terracotta-colored tiles, and the smell of old wood. The house had a whistle of its own when the Santa Ana wind blew through the cracks. I got used to that sound, like a lullaby. I didn't know then that the house would be mine on a legal document, or that it would become the spark of a war my siblings would call justice and that I would call betrayal. I knew Arthur through his quiet kindnesses, bags of lemons left on my doorstep, a drawn-out good morning, and a cup of chamomile tea on Sunday afternoons. He knew my schedule. I knew the rhythm of his steps. He taught me the names of the plants in his backyard, pointing with shaky fingers: bougainvillea, rosemary, sage. Sometimes he would tell me stories from when he drove down Highway 1 at sunset. He would name beaches like he was saying a prayer. He never mentioned inheritance. He never talked about a will. But he had a way of looking at the house as if the house were a person. My brothers, Mark and Lucas, lived 20 minutes away from me, one in Glendale, the other in Pasadena. We grew up together under the blue California sky, sharing bunk beds and garage dreams. Today, we are separate pieces on a frozen chessboard. Mark has a picture-perfect smile, flawless teeth, and pointed phrases. He's an insurance broker who measures people by their risks. Lucas is softer, with a quiet voice and a watery gaze, but he has a knack for disappearing when the conversation gets heated. When we'd meet for Sunday brunch at my mom's house in Highland Park, small cracks would appear under the table. Comments about who pays for what, who takes care of who got what. I never imagined the word lawsuit would walk through the front door with its hands in its pockets. I used to spend my nights writing lists, bills to pay, groceries, goals that seemed like confetti on the floor. Hike more, get back to playing guitar, take a road trip to Big Sur. Normal life has its own spell. We get distracted by what we already know. What I didn't know was that Arthur had asked about me at the local pharmacy when I got sick, that he had written my number on a greasy gas station card, and that he kept, in a cedar-scented drawer, small photographs he took of the backyard while I trimmed the branches. When I think about it, I see an invisible map being drawn, a map of affection that I would only see from above. Too late. In early autumn, a series of hot days squeezed the city like a hand. The Pacific breeze was slow to arrive, and the news reports repeated fire warnings. Arthur became quieter. The house, that neighbor's house that would later fall into my lap as an inheritance, seemed to be breathing with difficulty, as if the walls could feel the dryness. I brought him an apple pie one Wednesday. He opened the door with a crooked smile and paint-stained fingers. He was painting old picture frames. "Some things only become beautiful when time passes through them," he said. I laughed because I thought he was talking about the frames. He was talking about me, or the house, or maybe about what he was going to leave in writing. On Saturday, Mark showed up without warning. He honked like a hurried messenger and came up my stairs with the smell of expensive cologne and economic urgency. "Carl, did you see what Arthur's house is worth? Look at this." He showed me a real estate valuation website on his phone. Cold numbers under the midday sun. I laughed, defending myself with irony, but the laugh was breathless. Why are you looking at that? I asked, curiosity. The market is crazy. You should think about buying something, investing. An inheritance doesn't just fall from the sky. A phrase thrown out casually. A blade on the table. The next week, Arthur asked for help organizing some papers. It's just a simple thing, he said. His hands were shaking a little more. His smile seemed to have sharp edges. I swept the table with a damp cloth, organized folders, and aligned paper clips. There were old bills, letters from dead friends, and repair guarantees that held memories like rusty staples. In a blue folder, I saw the word will. My heart skipped a beat. I politely moved the folder away, like someone respecting an altar. Arthur took a deep breath, placed his hand over mine. You always showed up when it rained on the inside. I didn't understand it at the time, but the house did. The wooden floor made a light sound, like a seal being broken. That night, I dreamed of the red tiles, the swaying porch, the August moon resting on the railing. I woke up to the smell of sage coming from the window, and for a moment I forgot who I was. I only remembered the will, the inheritance, the neighbor's house, like words lit up on a sign in the dark. I made coffee, put on an old UCLA t-shirt, and left early. The city was breathing easier after a brief drizzle, and the pavement shone as if someone had polished it. At noon, Lucas texted me. A short message. Mom asked about you. Brunch Sunday? I replied with a neutral emoji. He insisted. Mark has a big project, wants to talk about investments. Says you should take advantage of the market. Old houses in Silver Lake are going to blow up. I stopped typing. I watched the street. A mail carrier was moving slowly, with a heavy bag and tired eyes. He carried the weight of my premonition. On Sunday, the table in Highland Park was as bountiful as ever. Tall pancakes, crispy bacon, fruits cut with precision. My mom had the sweetness of a well-cared-for home, but her back hurt, and she demanded silence when the pain flared up. Mark commanded the conversation with the air of an expert. Lucas laughed at the precise moments. Carl, you need to think about your future. Have you thought about selling, saving up, investing? Look at the houses in the neighborhood. I chewed slowly. I thought about Arthur. I thought about the blue folder. I didn't say anything. I kept the secret like someone holding water in their hands. The week went by with small signs, the city leaving messages on my path. A window in the neighbor's house rattling on its own. A black cat crossing the street. The scent of chamomile coming without a breeze. I got a call from Arthur's clinic. His voice was weak but lucid. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. No need to worry. But I worried. I brought him some broth. He didn't open the door. I left the bottle in the shade of the bougainvillea and left with a feeling that a page was about to turn. At the office, I reviewed contracts with glassy eyes. The word property shimmered. Usufruct made shadows. Dispute whistled through the corners of the text. The inheritance appeared as if it were a character I hadn't yet introduced, but who was already demanding to speak. I closed my laptop early, went for a walk to the lake. The sky had that washed-out color of a late California afternoon, and families spread picnics like promises on the grass. I sat, breathed, and decided. The next day, I would ask Arthur if he needed help with lawyers. Not out of interest, out of care. The line is thin, I know, and those who see from the outside always choose the worst reason. I didn't have time. The next morning, sirens sliced through the block like blades. 2 ambulances, a police car, neighbors lining the sidewalk. I ran out barefoot, my heart galloping. Someone said my name. Someone pointed to the porch. At the door, a paramedic with compassionate eyes. Arthur, a body I had always seen standing, now reclined on a stretcher, his fingers still stained with paint. Did he see me? I don't know. I think so, because his lips were trembling as if trying to articulate a farewell. He touched the pocket of his pajamas. An envelope fell, white as silence. I picked it up without the courage to open it. At the hospital, the hallway smelled of bleach and waiting. At the reception desk, the nurse spoke with kindness and caution. A long pause, an invisible signature in the air. I returned to the street with the envelope in my jacket pocket, my legs like rubber. I held the paper as if it were a wounded bird. At home, I sat at the table, swallowed hard, and opened it. I recognized the neat handwriting. It was a short letter, and behind it, a photocopy of a document. The same word now in clear letters, will. My neighbor left me his house. The house, the inheritance. A knot unraveled in my chest, and in the same place, another one formed, harder, hotter. I thought about Arthur. I thought about the porch, the tiles, the whistle of the wind. I thought about my siblings. I should have gone to sleep. Instead, I started listening to the street. A car parked slowly, footsteps on the sidewalk, whispers, the echo of a phone notification. A message from Mark at 10:14 p.m. Can we talk early tomorrow? About your neighbor's house. How did he know? Who told him? Maybe no one told him. Maybe he always knew. Maybe he was always waiting. I replied with 3 words that tasted like stone. Tomorrow, at my place. And I felt, for the first time, the shadow of the lawsuit stretching along the living room wall, reaching out to the window as if looking for the handle. I thought the hardest part would be accepting the inheritance. I didn't imagine that the real burden would come from my family. I closed my eyes and saw Arthur's backyard lit by party lights. I saw the table with paper clips, the blue folder, the light touch on my hand. I heard his voice again. You showed up when it rained on the inside. California has days that feel eternal, but night always comes. And when it came, it brought with it the promise that nothing would be easy anymore. What happened next was even worse. And it started with a bitter coffee and a smile I would never be able to forget. The Los Angeles sun seemed crueler that day, burning the asphalt as if it wanted to erase any trace of innocence. The city never sleeps, but sometimes it seems to doze with ulterior motives. And it was in this urban stupor that everything began to reveal itself. Arthur had passed away a few days ago, and I was still getting used to the silence that spread through the street. His absence was almost physical. The gate that used to creak in the morning was closed. The bougainvillea was starting to droop without his care, and the house seemed to hold its breath. It was as if it was waiting for the exact moment to deliver the secret it was holding. That morning, I received a call from Arthur's lawyer, a discreet office on Wilshire Boulevard, nestled between crowded coffee shops and glass buildings that reflected a cloudless sky. The secretary, with a rehearsed voice, asked me to come in for the reading of the will. My first reaction was disbelief. Why would I be on that list? My blood ran cold. Curiosity pushed me into my car. I drove through the chaotic traffic of the 101 freeway, cars stuck together like ants in a line. The radio was talking about fires in the mountains near Malibu. The sirens, the heat, the giant billboards advertising Hollywood movies, everything seemed like a fictional setting. And without realizing it, I was already the main character. I parked in an underground garage that smelled of gasoline and old dust. I went up the elevator with a lump in my throat, holding my purse like a shield. The office was cold, decorated with paintings of Californian desert landscapes. The lawyer, a tall man with gray hair, greeted me with a firmness that hid compassion. "Carl Jhensen?" he asked. I nodded. He led me to a room where other people were waiting, neighbors, distant acquaintances, perhaps Arthur's relatives. No one's face was too familiar. No one's gaze was welcoming. The reading began formally, dryly, with the legal cadence of someone who has done this dozens of times. Small bequests were designated for charities, longtime friends, and even a dog shelter in Santa Monica. Then, the phrase fell like thunder from a clear sky, and as for the property located in Silver Lake, I leave it entirely to my neighbor and friend, Carl Jhensen, who was by my side in times of loneliness and need. The words hung in the air and settled on me with the weight of a rock. I felt all eyes turn in my direction, like headlights cutting through the night. My fingers were trembling. I took a deep breath. The inheritance wasn't just a house. It was a turning point. On the way back, my phone vibrated incessantly. Messages from Mark, missed calls from Lucas. I hadn't told them anything, but someone had already spread the news. The city seemed to mock me. The graffiti on the walls in downtown showed phrases about destiny. The homeless on the corners muttered, "Watch out for family." Everything sounded like a premonition. That night, we met at a busy restaurant on Hollywood Boulevard, ironically called the Family Table. Neon lights reflected in the windows, and the Walk of Fame glistened under the hurried feet of tourists. My brothers were already there, with calculated expressions. Mark smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Lucas fiddled with his napkin, avoiding eye contact with me. "So it's true?" Mark began, his voice louder than it should have been, drawing glances from nearby tables. Arthur left you the house? I swallowed hard. That's what the lawyer said. And you think that's fair? He retorted, leaning over the table. We grew up together in this neighborhood. You don't deserve it more than we do. Lucas tried to intervene, muttering something about staying calm, but the tension was already set. A chill ran up my spine. The dinner turned into a courtroom, and I already knew who the accusers were. When I got home that night, the street looked different. The windows of Arthur's house glowed as if they were still alive. But behind me, I could have sworn I heard footsteps. Discreet, synchronized with mine. I turned my head. Nothing but shadows and the wind carrying dry leaves. I went inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch with the envelope on my lap. The will was still a new thing, but it already smelled of gunpowder. I knew the inheritance would not be accepted in silence. And what happened next was even worse than I could have imagined. I woke up before the sun rose, with a dry throat and a heavy heart. Los Angeles was still sleeping, but I could already feel the city pulsing outside the distant hum of the I-5. A helicopter slicing through the sky toward downtown. The isolated bark of a dog in Echo Park. I put coffee on to brew, trying to convince myself that the will reading had just been another strange scene from life. But the silence from my siblings since the night before was louder than any siren. I picked up my phone. No new messages, no calls. For people who always flooded my inbox with WhatsApp forwards and Sunday barbecue photos, that silence was almost deafening. The silence exposed more than words. I already knew they were preparing something .t work. I reviewed contracts without really reading them. The words danced before my eyes. Property, dispute, right heir. Each term seemed to poke at me, as if mocking my naivety. I left early and went for a walk through Silver Lake. The sloping streets, full of colorful graffiti and hipster cafes, had always brought me peace. But that day, even the jacaranda trees seemed to look at me with suspicion. In the middle of the walk, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. On the other end, a formal voice, a lawyer's voice. My blood ran cold. Miss Jhensen, I have received a recent consultation. Your siblings are evaluating legal measures regarding the house left by Mr. Linden. I almost dropped the phone. There was no room for doubt. They were arming themselves against me. I swallowed air as if it were a rock. The lawyer continued, I suggest you seek legal representation immediately. This type of dispute can be long-lasting, especially here in California. I hung up without responding. My legs felt weak. I sat on a bench near the lake, watching the ducks cross the surface. The contrast between the tranquility of the scene and the hurricane inside me made me tremble. My siblings' silence had a name, a face, and an intention. Betrayal. That night, Mark finally called me. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just said, Carl, don't take it personally. It's just a matter of justice. We deserve part of that house. You know you can't have it all to yourself. I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. Mark Arthur chose. He made it clear, there's nothing to discuss. On the other end of the line, silence. A silence that cut through me like a blade. Then came the phrase that would stick with me. You may think you've won, but you don't know who you're dealing with. I hung up without saying anything. My heart was pounding. I went to the window and stared at Arthur's house. The bougainvillea swayed in the wind, as if trying to console me. But what happened next was even worse. A shadow moved on the porch, too fast to be a reflection. The Sunday morning was heavy, with low clouds over Los Angeles, as if even the sky was suspicious of my family. I drove to Highland Park for the weekly brunch. The streets were quieter than usual. The colorful murals by local artists seemed to lose their shine, and every corner reminded me that I was heading to a table where love had turned into calculation. I entered my mom's house, and the smell of pancakes enveloped me like a childhood memory. For a moment, I almost forgot about the inheritance, the will, the dispute. But when I saw my siblings already seated, I realized there was no turning back. Mark, with the rehearsed smile of a salesman, occupied the head of the table as if he owned the space. Lucas, withdrawn, was on his phone, avoiding eye contact. My mom, innocent or pretending to be, asked about trivial things, the traffic, work, the autumn heat. As we passed the serving dishes, their glances at each other said more than words. I chewed slowly, trying to postpone the storm. With every forkful, memories flashed through me like lightning. The three of us playing hide and seek in the backyard, fighting over toys, swearing loyalty to each other when Dad passed away too soon. Childhood promises broken in front of pancakes with maple syrup. Mark wiped his mouth with his napkin, looked at me and said, "Carl, you know it doesn't make sense for that house to be only yours. Arthur wasn't family. We are. And family divides things." The phrase came out smoothly, but the poison was there, clear as the light that passed through the kitchen curtain. My chest ached. I wanted to respond with anger, but I held it in. I decided to observe, to listen, to absorb every detail. Lucas's trembling hand, the calculated glint in Mark's eyes, my mom's uncomfortable silence. I knew that moment would be etched in me like a distorted portrait. When I finished my coffee, I got up and went to the living room. I looked at the old photos hanging on the wall, the three of us as children, genuinely smiling. Then teenagers, in baggy 90s clothes. Then adults, already more distant. The timeline showed more than just our ages. It showed cracks I never wanted to see. Back at the table, Mark leaned in and said, almost in a tone of confession, "Carl, if you don't give in, we'll go to court." "We don't want to, but we will." The silence fell like a rock. Lucas, for the first time, looked up. He didn't say anything, but in his eyes, I saw it. I saw the confirmation. He was with Mark. The betrayal was no longer between the lines. It was explicit, naked, cruel, and deep down, part of me already knew it would be this way. I just didn't want to believe it. I left the house with a heart on fire. The gray sky seemed to be collapsing over Highland Park, and the cars parked on the street were silent accomplices to my pain. In the car, I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. But when I turned on the radio, an old song started to play, the same one Dad used to listen to on car rides. It was like a punch to the gut. The past mixed with the present, and for the first time, I understood that the inheritance wasn't just a house. It was a battlefield. In the rearview mirror, I saw Lucas standing at the door, watching me leave. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just watched, as if he were holding a secret he didn't yet have the courage to reveal. And I knew, deep inside, that this secret would come out soon. And that when it did, everything would change. The following days were a constant tightness in my chest, as if every corner of Los Angeles reminded me of the shadow that was growing behind me. Silver Lake, with its streets full of old houses and cafes crowded with young artists, seemed less bohemian and more threatening. The lake reflected the blue sky, but inside me, the water was murky. The news of the inheritance spread through the neighborhood like smoke on a dry Santa Ana day. At the market on Sunset Boulevard, I felt gazes I hadn't felt before. Muffled comments. An old neighbor, a lady, stopped me in the cereal aisle. "Carl, I heard about Arthur's house. You're lucky, honey, but be careful. Envy is a fire that doesn't go out easily." I smiled without responding, but inside I trembled. At home, small things started to change. The mail brought envelopes with no return address, filled with torn leaflets. One night, someone left a broken bottle leaning against the gate. Coincidence? Maybe. But deep down I knew. One day, on my way back down Alvarado Street, I saw Lucas hurrying into a law office. He didn't see me, but I saw him. My heart stopped. My hands got sweaty. It was proof that the lawsuit was no longer a threat. It was reality. I thought about confronting him right there, but I held back. It wasn't the right time. At work, my boss started to notice my fatigue. "Carl, you seem like you're in another world. Are you okay?" I smiled and said yes, but my mind kept repeating one word: dispute. The inheritance, which should have been a refuge, was now a war. My friends also noticed. A longtime colleague, Maria, invited me for coffee in downtown near Broadway. Amid historic buildings and the bustle of tourists, she was direct. "You're different. Your siblings are spreading stories. They're saying you manipulated Arthur, that you took advantage of his loneliness." I swallowed hard. I felt the ground disappear. "That's a lie," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. Maria held my hand. "I know, but they want to paint a different version, and a lot of people will believe them." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the living room of Arthur's house, still impregnated with the smell of old wood, and observed every detail. The armchair where he read newspapers, the bookshelf with old travel books, the worn-out rug from his footsteps. Everything there screamed that his choice had been sincere, that there was no manipulation, just genuine gratitude and affection. But how could I prove that? The next day, while watering the plants in the backyard, I heard voices from the other side of the fence. I recognized Mark's. He was speaking softly but firmly. She won't resist. We'll pressure her until she gives in. My breathing stopped. I was being surrounded. Their plan was to crush me with the weight of the pressure. It was then that I realized I couldn't pretend to be normal anymore. The net had closed in, and the steps I took from then on would decide my future. But what happened next was even worse. Los Angeles dawned golden, with the sun hitting the glass windows of the downtown buildings and reflecting like sharp blades. I walked through the city with calculated steps, my heart heavy and my mind on alert. With every honk, every siren, it seemed like fate was reminding me the time for being naive was over. Arthur's house wasn't just brick and wood. It was a symbol. It was memory. And now, it was also a battlefield. I had to choose. Let myself be crushed by my siblings' pressure, or build invisible walls and plan my defense. The second option was the only one possible. I looked for a lawyer in Beverly Hills, recommended by Maria. The office was in a marble building, between luxury boutiques and cafes that sold espressos for the price of gold. The lawyer, a man with a calm voice and a sharp look, listened to every detail without interrupting. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, "Carl, you need to understand. Inheritance brings out the worst in people." But Arthur made a valid will. The problem isn't the law. It's how much your siblings are willing to distort the story. I nodded, a chill running up my spine. They'll invent anything. He agreed. Exactly. So we need witnesses. People who saw your relationship. Who know there was no manipulation. You need to prepare not just for the courtroom, but for the war of narratives. I left there with a new resolve. My first stop was the neighborhood pharmacy, where Arthur always bought his medicine. The clerk, a Mexican man with an easy smile, recognized me. "You were his neighbor, right? He always talked about you. He said you were the only one who showed up when it rained on the inside." Arthur's words, repeated by another person, made me tremble. I asked him to testify, and he accepted without hesitation. Then I went to the bookstore in Los Feliz, where Arthur used to buy old novels. The clerk remembered him fondly, and when I mentioned the lawsuit, her eyes narrowed. "Injustice. He used to say you were like family." Another witness. Another piece on the board. While I was building my circle of allies, Mark was sending me direct, almost threatening messages. "There's still time to give in, Carl. It will be cheaper for you." I would read and delete them. Not responding was part of the strategy. Showing weakness now would be digging my own grave. At night, I sat on the porch of the house, looking at the lights of Los Angeles twinkling in the distance. The city seemed to be watching me. I decided I wouldn't face this war alone. Besides the witnesses, I needed someone close. I called Maria. She came without a second thought, bringing cheap wine and firm hugs. We talked late into the night, outlining a plan of action, laughing to trick the fear. But even with allies, I knew the confrontation was getting closer. I could feel it in the air, like the smell of rain before a storm, like the silence that precedes an explosion. And what happened next was even worse. An anonymous letter appeared in my mailbox, written in shaky handwriting, with no signature. Just one phrase: "That house will never be yours." It was a hot afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of heat that makes the downtown buildings shine as if they were on fire. The sky was clear, cloudless, but inside me, everything was a storm. The lawsuit had already been filed. My lawyer had informed me that morning. It was no longer a threat. It was reality. My siblings had turned the love of our childhood into gunpowder. The courthouse was near Hill Street, in the heart of the city, among skyscrapers and historic buildings. I walked up the stone steps with short breaths, feeling the weight of every gaze on me. Cameras, onlookers, people waiting for a scandal. Los Angeles loves a show. And now I was the show. In the courtroom, the air conditioning buzzed like an annoying insect. My siblings were already there. Mark, impeccable in a navy blue suit, smiled like someone who had already won. Lucas, more reserved, hid his nervousness behind a black briefcase. When they saw me enter, they didn't look away. The trial hadn't even started, but the war was already underway. The judge opened the hearing with formality. My lawyer presented Arthur's will, each clause clear, each signature valid. He showed Photos of me helping him, receipts proving that I had never received anything in return, only offered my presence. But Mark was quick to counterattack. Your Honor, my sister manipulated an elderly, lonely, vulnerable man. He was not in his right mind when he wrote this document. The words cut like a blade. I wanted to scream, but I held back. I took a deep breath. Then, my lawyer called the witnesses. The pharmacy clerk went first. His firm voice echoed. Arthur spoke of her as a daughter. He said that Carl was the one who showed up when no one else did. Then the bookstore clerk, who confirmed he trusted her. He said the house was his way of saying thank you. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Mark tried to smile, but his smile faltered. Lucas lowered his eyes, unable to bear the weight of the truth. It was then that I felt something grow inside me, a strength I didn't know I had. I stood up and asked to speak. The judge granted it. I looked at the two of them and spoke, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. You don't want justice. You want what isn't yours. Arthur didn't leave me the house on a whim, but because he knew who was on his side. You never cared. You never showed up. I was there. I took care of him. This inheritance isn't a prize. It's a symbol, and I won't let you turn it into dirt. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Mark tried to react, but his voice came out shaky. You don't understand, Carl. We deserve it too. The judge interrupted him dryly, telling him to be quiet. The public confrontation was there, naked, exposed. The mask of cordiality had fallen. The whole courtroom saw who we really were. Me, defending the memory of a man. Them, trying to turn mourning into profit. I left the room with shaky legs, but with the certainty that something had changed. The war wasn't over yet, but the battle had left scars on all of us. And what happened next was even more unexpected. Someone was waiting for me outside, with information that could turn the entire case around. The afternoon sun burned the steps of the courthouse on Hill Street like a red-hot iron. I walked out with a light body but a soul in tatters. The confrontation had been public, every word recorded, every look revealed. But the war was still far from over. And it was there, on the sidewalk crowded with curious people and journalists looking for drama, that I found a surprise that would change everything. Amid cameras and flashes, a gray-haired woman called me by name. Carl Jhensen. She introduced herself as Evelyn, an old friend of Arthur's. Her gaze was firm, straightforward. We need to talk. Arthur told me things about you, about this house. I was holding on to it. But now you need to know. My heart sped up. We arranged to meet that night at a discreet cafe on Melrose Avenue. In the meantime, I wandered through the streets of downtown trying to process the avalanche of emotions. The neon lights, the crowded buses, the street artists playing saxophone seemed to mock my confusion. That night, I sat across from Evelyn. The cafe was full, the smell of cinnamon and strong coffee in the air. She opened her purse and pulled out a yellowed envelope. Inside, there were letters written by Arthur, some addressed to me, but never delivered. He described in detail his loneliness, his gratitude for my presence, and the conscious decision to leave the house to me. It was proof that there was no manipulation, just true affection. My hands trembled as I read those words. Each line was like Arthur's voice echoing from the past. Evelyn looked me in the eyes. He knew your siblings might react this way, and he asked that, if necessary, I would come to you. Now it's necessary. I felt tears sting my eyes. A part of me was filled with strength, but another part sank in sadness. The confrontation had revealed the ugliest side of my family, and now, the letters showed Arthur's purest face. The contrast was painful. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, my siblings were also dealing with the ashes of the battle. Mark, furious, was trying to articulate new strategies with lawyers. Lucas, ashamed, began to avoid meetings, disappeared from phone calls, and hid in the shadows. I knew the rift between them would only grow. Shame is silent, but it corrodes. I returned home with the letters on my lap, as if I were carrying a sacred treasure. I went inside and sat in the dark living room. The silence of Arthur's house now felt like a hug. But at the same time, every shadow on the walls seemed like a warning. The war wasn't over. The aftermath of the confrontation had only reignited the flame. Outside, I heard footsteps on the sidewalk. Slow, heavy, persistent. When I looked out the window, I saw Mark standing in front of the gate. He didn't come in. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me in the dark, as if it were a silent warning that he hadn't given up yet. My body went cold. I knew the worst was still to come. Los Angeles never sleeps, but for me, during that period, it seemed like the city had changed its face. The lights of downtown were shining, the crowded buses were crossing the avenues in a hurry, the palm trees on Sunset Boulevard were swaying as always, but inside me, everything was still suspended, as if I were breathing in slow motion. The lawsuit filed by my siblings advanced like a dirty tide, covering every part of my life. Mark's calls were frequent, sharp as knives. He never yelled, but every word had hidden poison. Carl, there's still time to give up. You know you can't face us. Split the house, and let's end this. I would hang up before he could poison my day even more. Lucas was different. He would send short, dry messages, sometimes in the middle of the night. We need to talk, or just, sorry. But it never went beyond that. He never took a stand. This silence of indecision hurt as much as Mark's direct attacks. The nights were long. I would lie in bed in Arthur's house, now mine, though on paper stained with disputes, and listen to every sound as if it were a threat. The creak of the wood, the meow of a cat in the backyard, the distant noise of a motorcycle going up the hill. Sleep wouldn't come, and when it did, it was broken by dreams where I saw my siblings ripping out doors, breaking windows, taking everything Arthur had left me. I would wake up sweating, my breath coming in short gasps. It was in this scenario that the letters delivered by Evelyn became my support. I read them every night, in a low voice, like someone praying. Arthur's words were a balm. Carl, you were always there. This house is more than just walls. It's a memory, and I want it to be yours when I'm gone. Every line reaffirmed my certainty. I couldn't give up. I couldn't let them erase his will. Even so, the consequences of the war surrounded me. At work, my boss started to notice. Carl, you're unfocused. You've made mistakes on basic contract clauses. I tried to justify myself, but I could see in his eyes that my professional image was being corroded. Some colleagues were already whispering in the hallways. The neighborhood was also reacting. At the corner coffee shop, I felt two women watching me and whispering, "That's her. The one with the neighbor's house. They say she manipulated the old man." The rumor had grown like a weed, fueled by Mark's distorted versions. My mom, who had remained distant until then, called me for dinner in Highland Park. The house smelled of garlic and sauteed tomatoes, just like in childhood. But the atmosphere was different. As she served the dish, she sighed deeply. Carl, your brothers are suffering. Can't you just give in a little? Maybe sharing is better than continuing to fight. That cut me. My own mother was asking me to give up, not because she thought I was wrong, but because she wanted peace. I felt a tightness in my chest. I took a deep breath and replied, Mom, it's not about dividing bricks. It's about respecting the last wish of someone who trusted me. If I give in, I'll kill his memory. She lowered her eyes. She didn't insist, but I saw the hidden disappointment.